Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome into the Blogger Bowl 2023 Big Ten preview. I'm Dan Weiner. That's Matt Rooney. Corporate Phil will pop in whenever he can on these. He has a really busy year or time of the year right now at work, so we're hoping maybe we can get Phil in here on Wednesday. But we are going to do a Power Five conference preview every day this week. Some will be live, some we might tape. Who knows? We'll figure it out. Matt, how you doing, bud?
Yeah, shout out Phil for having like a real life, like corporate person, important job, and then just still on the side, just totally out of love of the game, coming in here and talking college football with us whenever he can make it. I love it. Dan, you got home field on? Which one
I
is
do.
that?
Gophs, baby.
I like that. This is part of the new Notre Dame release, which was
Ooh, nice.
fantastic. I love the blue collar with the. I
The
noticed
rotation.
after I ordered it that all three of my shirts were like that, like cream off white color. I
Mm,
guess that's just kind of my color. I really like it. It goes good with college football stuff too.
it does. That's what this is. My lighting in here is awful. It's the cream colored. Go for 62 Rose Bowl champs. Talk some Big Ten football. I thought about it after the fact, maybe doing like a team that's not in the conference yet for each of
Hmm,
our previews. So like wearing a UCLA T-shirt today for the Big Ten.
I like that.
Although
Oregon.
I don't really
I,
have a Stanford, Cal, Washington State, or Oregon State shirt, so I can't really do that for the Pac-12. But
No,
who
it
knows?
might not be the Pac-12 anymore after a
Yeah,
year.
the Pac-4. We'll talk about them though later this week. I'm really excited to talk about them in a league that has America's team this year. But we're going to start with the villains of college football. We're going to talk about the most predatory league in all of college football. We're going to talk about the Big Ten today. These are the bad guys because here's the thing: the SEC, they are predatory as well. However, the SEC has never once claimed to be anything other than what they are. They want to completely dominate the sport of college football in every form or fashion, on the field, off the field, in the media, so on and so forth. The Big Ten wants to do that too, but maintain their we care about academics and we care about the Rose Bowl and all this kind of stuff. But no, 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 no. These are the bad guys, but it's a good league. It's obviously we know there's a lot of talent at the top of the league with Ohio State and Michigan. There's some fun teams kind of in the middle of the pack. The further down you get, the kind of sadder it gets in the Big Ten. But to do a little bit of a kind of just example to show you where we are and what the expectations are, I have this graphic here, which is this is the ESPN SP Plus preseason ratings for the Big Ten. And the way that these work, this is from Bill Connolly. This is just a straight point system. So what it means is Ohio State 29, Michigan 28.6. That means Ohio State would be favored by 4/10 of a point over Michigan on a neutral field all the way down. So they'd be about a 6-point favorite over Penn State. Penn State would be a 7-point favorite over Wisconsin, and so on. And I really like this because it kind of illuminates the tiers that we have in the Big Ten this year. You see, you have Ohio State and Michigan up there at the top. We can obviously discuss a rating system that has Michigan slightly behind Ohio State. That'll be controversial, I think, in the minds of a lot of people, but not to the people who do analytics in the sport of college football. Penn State, kind of there in no man's land a little bit in that next tier by themselves with Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota, just as you would kind of expect the big dogs in the West. Maryland, Illinois, they're in a tier together. Then you have Michigan State, Purdue, Nebraska, kind of in another tier, and then poor Rutgers, Indiana, and Northwestern bringing up the rear. When you just look at that in terms of not necessarily the nuts and bolts. Let's say I disagree that Penn State is 7 points better. What jumps out to you when you kind of look at the ratings laid out like that?
I think it's what you said at the top with Ohio State being ahead of Michigan. I know the analytics might favor them and they have the reputation and all that, but man, like, and this is coming as a, normally a guy that doesn't like the University of Michigan and roots actively against them. They got so much talent coming back. They have seemingly all of their big time playmakers coming back next year. They get Ohio State at home. I know that has nothing to do with this rating, but like that for me screams is like even the coaches poll, the AP has them at 2 against Ohio State. I don't necessarily see how a team breaking in a new quarterback is going to be put up against a Michigan team that, I've been somewhat critical of JJ McCarthy's play. Not that he's a bad quarterback, but I don't think he's this top tier, quarterback that a lot of people have him as rated as. But like he's still been there. He's been to a college football playoff. He's It'll be his third year of experience, second year as a starter. I don't understand how Michigan is not seen as the right now on paper the favorite or the best team in the Big Ten. Not that Ohio State won't beat them or can't beat them or won't be there at some point, but for me, Michigan should kind of be the team on top of that conference.
Well, I mean, I think that most people think that Michigan is a little bit better. But yeah, I mean, you look at it, and a lot of the thing about power ratings and all the thing about power ratings in so many situations is a lot of it is based on priors and what your not necessarily what your reputation is, but what the numbers have bared out over a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And even though Michigan has turned the tide in this rivalry the last couple of years, Ohio State has been the dominant force in the Big Ten for a number of years now. And so that's certainly part of it. I also think when you look at the Ohio State thing, we know they're replacing the quarterback. Kyle McCord, everyone thought he was going to be the guy. Devin Brown's Heisman price has dropped from
I saw some chatter about him
like
on yesterday. I think it was on Twitter earlier this week, or not earlier this week because it's Monday, but over the weekend that he's kind of gaining some steam as a guy that could actually win that job now.
Yeah, so Devin Brown might win that job. I'm not so worried about the quarterback situation at Ohio State.
I'm not either.
They have a pretty good reputation of, at least at the college level, developing their quarterbacks. The bigger concern is going to be up front on the offensive line. They lost 3 starters, both tackles and a starting center. An offensive line that even last year with the veteran guys got bullied a little bit at times. But it's Ohio State. They're going to have talent there. The defense has good players at all 3 levels. We talked about on the preview show, or I did, JT Tuimoloau, one of my favorite guys who I think needs to become more consistent, but has the ability to be one of the best defensive players in the country. Jack Sawyer, another guy on the defensive line at linebacker, Tommy Eichenberg, Steele Chambers. And then in the secondary, Denzel Burke at cornerback and Lathan Ransom, their strong safety. Like, they have really good players at all their levels, but man, in their 2 biggest games of the year, they gave up big chunk plays against Michigan. They gave up big chunk plays against Georgia late in that game. Jim Knowles made that defense better in year 1, and you would assume that just with the kind of consistency of knowing the system a little better, they would probably be a little bit better this year. But he's also a guy who's been very inflexible, and what changes is he going to make to how he does things? That's going to be the big issue. But Ohio State, it's just a matter of they recruit at a higher level than anybody in that league. And that's probably what it bears out to. But yeah, man, there's a lot of question marks about this. And we know how good, we know Marvin Harrison.
They have the best player in the conference, and it's not really
the best player in the conference. They have, and Egbuka is a really good number 2. Mayan Williams, Travion Henderson. The running game is going to be good. Like we said, we think the quarterback is going to be pretty good regardless of who it is. We think that player will develop into a good player based on track record. So you never really want to count them out in this situation, but and to be fair, like, it's a half a point difference.
Yeah.
Like, obviously what that's telling you is that if these two teams play in Ann Arbor, Michigan would be favored in that game slightly. So
with 2.5.
Yeah. So, I mean, I get it with Ohio State there, but yeah, I mean, I agree with your assessment of Michigan too.
What Ohio State needs, and I don't want to sound like a meatball here, but like, they've lacked that killer instinct the last couple of years, like that swagger of we're Ohio State. And I don't want to compliment Urban Meyer because he's not a very good human being, but at Ohio State, like, when he was there, they had that. And it seems like Ryan Day kind of lost it when they went to Michigan 2 years ago. And like, I don't really fault him too much for that game. That was a really tough weather game. That was, Michigan team of destiny, a really good Michigan team that just kind of punched them in the mouth, and they were able to, be the better team on that day. But Ohio State, since that moment, has kind of lost it. They bring in Jim Knowles to kind of help their defense get over that point. Like you said, at times they look dominant, but in the kind of biggest moments of the year, they've laid a little bit of an egg. Obviously, the Michigan game, they couldn't stop giving up chunk plays. The Georgia game, they had a 2-touchdown lead going into the 4th quarter, whatever it was, end up blowing that. At times during that Michigan game, even the offensive end, like, you got CJ Stroud and Marvin Harrison Jr., and they're not really taking shots. They're playing it safe. Ohio State needs to go back to that. Like, they need to have that swagger, that Ohio State killer instinct that they've had in the past, because they are the most talented team in the conference. They recruit at the highest level. That defense, I mean, the list of names that you just read off that are coming back this year, like, they're loaded on that side of the ball. They have a ton of talent on offense. The coaching now needs to get them where they need to go. I truly feel like this team's destiny falls on the shoulders of their head coach, who is their offensive coordinator, and then their defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair assessment from that standpoint. If you go back and you look, like, I think as we get further and further away from that Michigan game last year, I think it's going to be interesting to kind of take a look at it and see how unlikely of a result that was, of all the potential outcomes. Not saying like if they played 10 times, Ohio State would have won 9 of them. Like Michigan would have won their fair share of those games, but the way that played out was very, very unlikely.
Ohio
Michigan,
State just handed the game over. It
yeah,
felt
I
like
mean,
here you go.
Michigan took the best shot Ohio State had early, weathered the storm, and then they had big play after big play after big play. But they really didn't sustain much over the course of that game. They just hit
a bunch of home runs.
Exactly. And
that worked. Like, that is a thing. How sustainable
yeah.
is that? We're not really sure. But that is a way to win ball games. They connected on a lot of their shots, and obviously Donovan Edwards had the 2 big runs. But like, it's not to go back to JJ McCarthy bashing, but like, you're watching that game, like his numbers were very good, but a lot of his numbers were inflated because of, receivers wide open downfield or turning and just kind of throwing one-on-one and giving his receivers a chance, and good on him for doing that. But then on the other side of the ball, Ohio State didn't really even do that. They didn't like, hey, we have Marvin Harrison Jr. Let's try and give him a chance deep. Let's give our guys a chance to make plays. Michigan let their best players do that. Ohio State didn't.
Yeah, and when you talk about Michigan, you talked about how much they have coming back. They are loaded. They're 5th in the country in returning production from a team that should have played for a national championship game, should have played for a national championship last year. Obviously made the playoffs, lost in the semifinals, but McCarthy's back, Corum's back. A guy I talked to who's really invested in Michigan said he wouldn't be surprised if Donovan Edwards is their best offensive player. Cornelius Johnson, Roman Wilson are good at wide receiver. Colston Loveland, a guy who a lot of people think is a breakout kind of player.
He had a solid year last year.
Yeah, and with Schoonmaker gone, he's going to see a lot more targets, and that could be a big thing. They lost a couple of guys on the offensive line, but they brought in some transfers from the Pac-12, so they're going to have some depth there. Defensively, they've got talent at every level. Chris Jenkins, the mutant, is a guy who's getting a ton of hype, as a guy who could be the next Michigan first-round draft pick defensive lineman. He's just a monstrous player. And they have this whole thing where they've been running a beat Georgia period in practice, where they're running their 12 and 13 personnel packages to try to beef up to play with Georgia. My thing about Michigan, the one thing that until the end of the season that they struggled with was the explosive plays. Like they got them against Ohio State. They got some when they needed them against TCU, although they were just digging out of a hole that entire game. But by and large, over the balance of the season, that team, they were very much a Harbaugh, tough-minded, grind you down, beat you up front, and run the ball all over you. I just wonder what their ceiling is as a program, and if they don't have a dynamic passing game. Like, they want to beat Georgia. I get it. I'm of the mindset that it wouldn't have been 65-7, but I don't think the national title game would have been close if it had.
I don't think it would have been a very different story from the semifinal game, from the Orange Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been about the same thing. Georgia probably would have beat them up and maybe beaten them by more, because I think Georgia's offense was a little bit more dynamic in the passing game than it was the year before. But they might have a defined ceiling of, we can beat the top teams in college football if they don't develop a really dynamic passing game. I think we've seen the flashes from JJ McCarthy, but I really want to see if he can be a guy who can put an offense on his back week in and week out if they need him to, make big throws consistently in a lot of games. Frankly, they're not going to really need him to a ton this year. They have a pretty nice schedule outside of obviously the 2 big divisional games.
Yet again.
But they don't play Iowa and they don't play Wisconsin, I don't think. So they get kind of an easy draw out west. So we're not going to need to see it, but I want to see it at Penn State this year. Yeah, because
last year have to go to Penn State.
Last year was the peanut butter and jelly tunnel fight game. So they have to go to Happy Valley, and I want to see JJ McCarthy on the road in a hostile environment get the job done if they need him to. He did it against Ohio State. A lot of that was Ohio State kind of making mental mistakes, game planning things that weren't on point there. But I just wonder if they have a limited ceiling just because of the way that they're set up and the way that they do things. Now, the limited ceiling is we can be the second best team in the country, but they want to beat Georgia. I don't think they've been particularly close. The kids say there's levels to this.
Yeah.
Like, there's levels to this, and they can be number 2, but the gap between where Georgia was the last 2 years and the gap where Michigan was pretty wide. And I as much returning talent as they have, I still don't know if it's going to fully close, even with the amount of talent they have coming back this year.
Yeah, and like hypothetically speaking, say they do meet in a college football playoff game. I know in order for a lot of Big Ten teams to stop Michigan's rushing attack, they're going to have to load the box and they're going to have to probably play an extra man up there to slow them down. That's not something Georgia's going to have to do. So to your point, JJ McCarthy is kind of yet to show us that he can really put that Michigan team on his back against a really good team and go win a football game. If they hypothetically were to play a Georgia team in a college football playoff, that moment would probably come, because we've seen the last 2 years now, Georgia's defense is really darn good. And it doesn't necessarily matter how much they have returning. They're just a factory. They're going to put however many new guys in there. They're going to be really darn good because they just get the best people in the country alongside Alabama. They're not going to have to really load the box to stop Michigan. They're going to be able to stop them with 6, 7 in the box, whatever. So JJ McCarthy is going to have to make some plays. And again, we haven't totally seen that consistently in the biggest moments. He obviously did it at times against Michigan, but then the TCU game, I mean, he made as many, bad plays, I guess, turnovers, game, costly plays as he did big plays offensively. So we're going to have to see it from him. Again, I think he's got I do think he has a high ceiling. I do think he's a talented quarterback, but like, I don't get the whole, he's one of the best, 2, 3, 4 quarterbacks coming back this year. I just haven't seen that from him yet.
I think that's a fair assessment. And we go down the list in the conference. We talked about those two teams. I think just ignoring situations, I think just based on talent and expectations, I think you would find very few people to tell you that Penn State is not the third best team in that league. Like, pretty clear that they are the number 3 team in that league. They have a good offensive line coming back. I talked about Nick Singleton on our superlative show, and then Katron Allen. He carried the ball more than Singleton did last year, but a great duo there. Allar, a ton of hype, former 5-star recruit. They need to find consistency at wide receiver. They don't have proven depth. Perhaps Dante Cephas, a transfer from Kent State, who 2 years ago had 82 catches and 1,200 receiving yards, can help. They're in year 2 under Manny Diaz on defense. They need some guys to step up in their secondary. They were very good last year, one of the best pass defenses in the country. Again, more consistency, continuity under second-year coordinator. It's a good unit. They're looking for someone to replace the safety, and then Joey Porter Jr. as well. But for me, what it comes down to with Penn State, you dumped on Ryan Day. Who doesn't love dumping on Ryan Day? Mm-hmm. But Penn State might have a head coaching problem. Again, when we talk about levels to these things, Penn State, they're a top 10 team in the country this year. I don't think you're going to find a lot of people who are going to tell you that they're not a top 10 team. But James Franklin is 3-15 at Penn State against top 10 teams. He's 1-10 against top 5 teams. Ohio State and Michigan are very likely going to be top 5 teams when Penn State plays them. They're going to need to beat at least one of them to put themselves in contention to make it to the Big Ten title game. And I just don't know if James Franklin has that dog in him as a coach, as the kids say. Again, I like using all the slang today. Where do you come down on Penn State this year?
I mean, I think they're going to have to. I don't think they're going to go to Ohio State and win that game. I know they have in the past before, when Saquon was there, but I think they're going to have, like, that Michigan game at home. It's I guess it'll probably be big noon kickoff. By the way, I'm not a fan of big noon kickoff, because they put like the game like that game should be on at 7:00 at night, like under the lights at Penn State, but instead it's going to be on at noon. I don't like that for whatever reason. I think I like when the best games are night games. Having said that, that's going to be a game they're going to have to win. It's put up or shut up time for James Franklin. I know they're breaking in a new quarterback, like we said, in Drew Aller, who's got a ton of hype. Also got a lot of pressure on him, because myself included, a lot of people have, let's say, talked not great about Sean Clifford over the last few years and felt like he's been the guy who's holding them back. I think while Sean Clifford has been, he was fine. He was solid. He was good enough. He was also not good enough to get them over the hump. They now have a quarterback that has at least the talent to get them over the hump. There's kind of no more excuses for this Penn State team. And James Franklin's in a weird spot. He keeps getting good talent, and he keeps not being able to get kind of over that hump. And it's not the easiest hump to get over. It's Ohio State, who's one of the most consistent programs in the country, and Michigan, who has turned themselves into that. But, I mean, you're going to have to start beating them. I mean, James Franklin, speaking as a Notre Dame fan, is starting to remind me a lot of like Brian Kelly. Is it just going to be we're going to be pretty darn good at times, and then the biggest moments not really going to be able to win those big games. And is that going to be good enough? And kind of where are you at with James Franklin? Because he's good. He's got the program in a really good spot. But like, if they can't get over that hump, do you just keep riding it out with them? Where does that? I don't know. It's a tricky spot if they don't get over the hump. And it feels like this year and next year are the two really good chances they're going to have to do it. And if they don't, then we're going to have that conversation about them.
Well, you run the risk of the Bo Pelini situation, where like Nebraska winning 9 games every year wasn't good enough for them. They fired Bo Pelini and they haven't come close since. Yeah, I mean, it's a tough situation. Obviously, things are going to change in that league next year. You're adding one team to the mix who is going to contend in that league. I don't think UCLA will. I think USC obviously will. Maybe Washington and Oregon will. Who knows? We'll see. But Penn State stands to maybe be the biggest beneficiary of the end of divisions.
Yes,
in the Big
very
Ten,
much so.
because the possibility of not having to have Michigan and or Ohio State on your schedule at all, let alone every year, is going to be something that benefits them. So they might have to grin and bear it for one more year. But okay, cool. You lose the divisions, but if you get USC in their top 10 team, or Washington is really building something under Kalen DeBoer, or Oregon just continues to recruit at a high level in their top 10 team, isn't going to be the same thing that he has year in and year out, where he just cannot win those games. Out west, there you saw it there. We had 3 teams in the West kind of bunched together, and they're the teams that you would probably expect to be the contenders in that division, although we did see Purdue make a run last year to the Big Ten title game. We saw Illinois kind of shoot themselves in the foot and really have a chance. They just lost a couple of one-score games, but it feels like recently, the last couple of years, it's been Wisconsin, it's been Iowa, and it's been Minnesota as kind of the 3 most consistently good teams. I talked about it on the preview show. I'm 100% all in on Wisconsin.
I
love it. The Fickle hire is such a good hire. They went and they got a coach who's going to come in and modernize them without trying to change their identity completely. Talked about how Phil Longo, despite his reputation as an air raid coach, is not afraid to run the ball. He only, in 4 years at North Carolina, this past season was the only time he threw the ball more than they ran the ball in his time at North Carolina. And that's because they have a quarterback who's going to potentially be a top 5 pick. Tanner Mordecai is a guy who can throw the ball around the yard. They brought in some transfers from Cincinnati to help bolster the offensive line. Braylon Allen, a guy who was awesome as a freshman, not quite as good last year, but their passing game was just so inconsistent the last few years.
Yeah, it's easy to write that off as a blip on the radar.
Right. If their passing game is at all respectable, and I think it'll be more than that, I think this is going to be a very, very dangerous team in the Big Ten. While they're not as good, I don't think, as Penn State, I would much rather bet Wisconsin to win the Big Ten than I would Penn State, because Wisconsin could lose to Ohio State but get a rematch in the Big Ten title game and win it, whereas Penn State's going to have to beat at least one of those 2 teams and get lucky. And I just feel like the route through the West is easier than the route through the East. So I don't think they're as good as Penn State, but I do think they are more likely to win the conference than Penn State is.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at their schedule, I mean, I know we're talking about conference, non-conference, it's not too difficult. They have Buffalo. They got to go to Washington State, which I guess could be a tricky spot, but I think that's a revenge game for them this year than Georgia Southern. But in conference, they go to Purdue. I think Purdue's going to take a little bit of a step back this year. I like Hudson Card, but I think they lost a lot of talent there, and you got a new head coach, new systems. They host Rutgers. Iowa at home is their biggest game in that West. They get them at home. They got to go to Illinois. Illinois, as good as they were last year, we saw in the draft, they lost a ton of talent. They got to host Ohio State, but then after that, it's at Indiana, home against Northwestern, home against Nebraska, at Minnesota. I'm not too high on Minnesota this year. I think they lost a lot of talent and a lot of skill positions offensively. I think the path is very clear that for them to be a 10-2, 11-1 football team. And yeah, like you said, while they might not be as talented as Penn State, I think they got a very good chance to be representing the West in Indianapolis.
I agree completely. And I think with you, I mean, obviously I agree about it completely. And maybe a spoiler alert, we'll have something on that in a little bit. But you look at Iowa, and we got to discuss it. As much as I hate Iowa,
honestly, it's weird. My most interesting storyline in the Big Ten this year is the Iowa Hawkeyes, a team that doesn't usually play a very interesting brand of football. Didn't mean to cut you off there, but I thought that was ironic.
No, I talked about it last year, and I don't think it's funny, and I don't think it's cute anymore. This thing where they're just like, oh, we're Iowa, we're not going to play offense. Like, Kirk Ferentz could have more Big Ten titles, could maybe have made a playoff at some point if he wouldn't stop being just so stubborn about this and like this God complex thing that he has, where his word is the law. And if he thinks that his idiot son, that's right, if he thinks that his son is the guy who can carry that offense as the coordinator and should be the guy calling plays, we've seen time and time again that he's not. And they had to put, like, it just goes to show how much of a joke of a situation this is, that they have to put a clause in the contract where Brian Ferentz gets a 1-year deal where they have to win 7 games and they have to score 25 points per game for him to get a 2-year extension. Like, we've lowered the bar for Iowa, and I haven't even looked at their non-con other than I know they play El Assico. Like, I don't know what their non-con is, but I'm guessing they're probably 2 games they're going to win.
Utah State, Western Michigan, both at home.
Who was the first one you said?
Utah State.
Utah State's a win. Western Michigan's a win. Northwestern's a win. I mean, you can just name 3 right there to get you to 7. And then obviously Illinois.
They'll beat Rutgers.
They play Rutgers. I mean, it's a joke of a situation that they've put themselves in. And like everyone's like, oh, well, they've got Cade McNamara. He's an upgrade at quarterback. Well, that's damning him with the faintest praise imaginable. There aren't very many quarterbacks that could have gone out and gotten who wouldn't be better than Spencer Petras. Who I feel really bad for with the situations they put him in last year. But like, if Cade McNamara was that good, wouldn't he still be starting at Michigan? Like, I know he's an upgrade over what they had before. And I know, but like JJ McCarthy was really, really good. But if Cade McNamara was that dude, wouldn't he have just kept the job and JJ McCarthy been the one who would have ended up leaving?
That's a tricky one.
I understand it's a trick, but like, I just don't know that Cade McNamara is suddenly the answer that's going to make that Iowa offense any better. And I don't know that it matters with Brian Ferentz calling plays and Iowa being Iowa.
I think he's going to make them better because Spencer Petras was never put in the best spot offensively the last couple of years. He was also pretty terrible. He was not a good quarterback. Yeah. I do think them go, and now again, this is banking on Kirk Ferentz changing at least a little bit, but I think the fact that they actually did go out in the transfer portal and go get themselves a successful yet safer option at quarterback. I think Sean Clifford-ish, like the Sean Clifford Drew Aller combo or comparison with what they had with JJ McCarthy at Michigan. Michigan saw the higher ceiling in JJ McCarthy and also is probably worried about losing him to the transfer portal if they didn't give him the job. And I like Cade McNamara. He's a very good quarterback. He's not a great quarterback though. You do have a ceiling, but Iowa's not a team that's going for a national championship, that's doing anything more than really trying to compete for a Big Ten West title. And, maybe you catch somebody on a day in Indianapolis in the winter. But Cade McNamara is better than what they've had there in a long time. And we have seen in the past when Kirk Ferentz has a solid quarterback, those teams are capable of winning 8, 9, 10 football games. They went out. They also got Eric All. They obviously have 2 good tight ends because that's just what Iowa does. They went out and got Caleb Brown as a former 4-star recruit out of Ohio State, who kind of fell out of favor there right away. I think that's at least a step in the right direction, getting themselves kind of a gadget skill player, which is something Iowa doesn't usually like to do. And yeah, you said it, like they gave Kirk Ferentz's son this weird contract, but also that kind of tells me that I think Kirk's going to do what he can to make sure his kid keeps his job, including maybe taking a little bit more control of that offense if he has to. Not sure if that's a great thing or a bad thing, but like in their best years when they have their best quarterback talent, like, that defense is going to be great. That defense brings back a lot of talent. They lost some, but they bring some back. They're going to be really good. That offense does seem like it's taken some steps to be more than just we're going to run the ball 40 times a game and maybe try and hope we hit a big pass play. Like they went out and got themselves a consistently good quarterback. We'll never call Cade McNamara great, but he's quarterbacked the team to a college football playoff. They went out and got themselves a skill player. They have some tight ends. They're going to be able to run the football. And that schedule's in the Big Ten West. It's never going to be that hard. They got to go to Wisconsin. They probably lose that one, but there's not a whole lot of too difficult spots for them in that schedule. So I'm intrigued by them. I think they are a team that could probably win 9, 10 games this year, and it wouldn't shock me. I think they'll for sure clear that 7-game threshold that Brian has to clear, but I'm very intrigued to watch them and see if this changes things for them offensively, because if this doesn't force them to at least adjust with the times a little bit, I'm not sure whatever would force Kirk Ferentz to do that.
But like you said something that like I have to push back on something for a second,
Fair.
which is their hope is they want to win the Big Ten West and make it to Indy. Like, I understand it's very difficult to beat Ohio State and Michigan and all that, but if their goal isn't to try to win the Big Ten, if their goal isn't to push for more, when it's clear they've been close, they've had a couple of teams win 10 games. They've been inch close away from doing it in the past. And you look at what Wisconsin's doing. You have Iowa, who you said it yourself, like it looks like Kirk Ferentz is doing the bare minimum to try to keep his kid employed. And Wisconsin said, we had a couple of down years. That's not good enough for us. We might be fighting against the current here because it's going to be difficult for us to recruit against Ohio State and Michigan, but we're going to go out. We're going to hire the best coach we can hire. We're going to modernize what we do, but we're going to stay in line with what we do, which is we're going to be Wisconsin. We're going to run the ball. We're going to do that, but we're going to try to be better on offense than we've been in the past while still doing what we do on defense. They are a program that clearly had ambition of at least trying to punch above their station. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe both Iowa and Wisconsin are fighting battles that they can't win in terms of trying to win the Big Ten. But Wisconsin, they have ambition. They said, we're going to try to do this. And Kirk Ferentz says, I want my son to have a job. And I think that's what drives me crazy, because I don't think that this is a program that has a ceiling of just getting to Indy. They can win the Big Ten. They can make, I mean, we've seen teams maybe get crushed in the playoffs. There's no reason that if a Michigan State can make a playoff, if a Washington can make the playoff, that Iowa, the way that they play defense, the way that they do have some guys on offense who have been good, can at least once every few years make a push for it. And it just seems like the priorities are elsewhere with their head coach, because he's been there so long and he's been so successful that he's kind of lost perspective on what the job is. And it's frustrating when they are good and could maybe be a team that throws a wrench into the plans of college football by beating Ohio State or Michigan and Indy. Because remember, I mean, it's a 1-game sample size. Anything can happen.
That's what Wisconsin and Iowa have going for them. They don't have to beat both of those teams and Penn State in a year. They have to be the best team in the subpar division and go have one really good day in Indy and knock them off. And I agree with you to an extent. I think last year was the year with Iowa where I was more fed up. I kind of thought 2 years ago, after seeing what Spencer Petras was and who you had, the fact that you just said, "No, we're going to come back and roll the dice with him again," instead of hitting the transfer portal, was the more egregious offense for me. Like, you know what you have, you have a pretty talented roster, and you're going to willingly admit that you just want to trot that guy back out there at quarterback. That to me was more of the failure. I might be proven wrong this year. Hell, I probably will be proven wrong this year. But I think the fact that not only they hit the transfer portal to go get a quarterback, but get one that this was a pretty big year in transfer portal quarterbacks, but go get one of the bigger names on the transfer portal. I thought that showed at least some sort of desperation, sign's the right word, but sign of like, all right, we need to maybe tweak some of the things we're doing here, because just rolling out these 2-3-star quarterbacks who know how to hand the ball off and know how to hit a hitch and sell play action isn't quite doing enough. We'll see. I might be wrong, but it seems like this offseason was a little bit more a step in the right direction of, okay, we need to get a little bit more modern with the times.
I mean, you look at what they did, and you look at Wisconsin, what Wisconsin did, and to me,
I'm not saying what Wisconsin did. Oh no, that's Dan. That's not what I'm arguing here. Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin had probably one of the best off seasons in college football.
Yeah,
I think it was fantastic. I'm not trying to compare Iowa to Wisconsin. I'm trying to just two completely separate, and we should compare them because they're competing for the same division title. That game I think it's midseason in Wisconsin, that's probably a de facto Big Ten West title game. But Wisconsin is still very far ahead of where Iowa was in terms of what they did this offseason. No doubt about it.
October 14th is the date there. Here's a fun trivia question for you.
I have a wedding that day.
Oh, brutal. Yeah. I'm going to be coming back from New York that day. Here's a fun trivia question for you. When was the last time the University of Minnesota had a quarterback drafted in the NFL draft?
Oh, God. 1960.
I mean, you underestimated the program a little bit, but not by a ton. 1972 was the
Who was
last
it?
time. I didn't write down the name.
Oh.
It was they've had 3 quarterbacks drafted. 2 were in the 8th round. Remember, they're only 7 rounds now. That's how long it's been. The 8th round, and one was a 4th round pick. I only say that because there are people in the program, around the program, who think that the Greek rifle, Ethan Kaliakmanis, has potential not this year, but maybe next year to be the first Gopher quarterback drafted in half a century, which kind of brings me to the rest of the conference.
Godspeed.
Is there anything else, anybody other team in the conference, the Big Ten, who you are fascinated by, who you're interested in, there's something that kind of stands out to you about any other particular teams in the Big Ten?
Illinois is the other team that kind of stands out to me because they had a very good year last year. 2 years ago with Brett Bielema's first year, I think they were 5-7, but like they had a solid year and they gave some teams some hard times. Last year, obviously, they had a really good year. They had Devon Weatherspoon go pro. I forgot the name of the other corner. And Chase Brown is obviously in the pros now. He was unbelievable last year. Like they were really good last year, and Brett Bielema has kind of made it pretty well known that he's not going to make the same mistake he made at Wisconsin and go leave for some mid-tier SEC job that he's kind of bound to fail at. It seems like he's pretty set with making Illinois just his new, like, this is my last job. I'm going to be here for a long time. I'm going to try and grow this program. And I think he's got a chance to kind of turn that into what he had at Wisconsin, a team that at their best, they're going to be a team that threatens to win 10 games that sadly, I'm not sure what's going to happen to the Rose Bowl, but like in years past, I would say would be a team that, might see make a run to the Rose Bowl every few years, or even in their bad years, they're still 8-4. Interested to see how he replaces the talent this year, because this is kind of, I do think in the long term, he's going to get them kind of maybe not to winning 10 games every year, but an 8-9 win team most seasons. But I'm interested to see how he replaces those guys because they lost a lot of talent, but he lives in a very fertile recruiting ground in Illinois. And for some reason, the people who have gone to Illinois or coached Illinois have never been able to recruit this state all that well. I have no idea why. It seems like it should be a home run. Brett Bielema is finally starting to do that. And if he can establish that recruiting success in Illinois, I think that's going to lead to pretty good program success. So interested to see how he replaces the guys that he lost and how he kind of gets that program where he gets them to at least this year.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting. He's just a good Big Ten coach.
Yes,
like,
he's a very good Big Ten football coach.
He did not fit in the SEC. It did not work out for him, but he understands the Midwest. He understands that league. And I agree from the standpoint of a lot of talent they've got to replace on both sides of the ball. But man, they're going to be good. So I coined the phrase last year that they were going to be a landmine team, a team that, if you see them coming and you're prepared for it, you'll be okay. But if you don't, they're going to blow your season up. Yeah. They proved to be much more than that last year. A legitimately good football team through most of the season. They're probably going to take a step back this year just because, it was one of those things where they had a lot of talent. That was veteran guys who were good on that team. And it'll probably be a step back. But yeah, I really like what they're doing. I don't really have a ton else in this league that I find extremely interesting. The one thing that I am kind of fascinated by is just kind of a philosophical thing, and that's Michigan State. And it's kind of more of an overarching thought that I've had about the sport of college football over the past couple of years. And that's the transfer portal and teams who have become overly reliant on it. How do you build a program when you're always churning talent on both sides? You're bringing in guys because their first year, Mel Tucker, he hit the portal hard. They came in, they were surprisingly good. And now it's like proof of concept. Is what is Michigan State doing now to show, hey, we are building something? I understand if you want to try to do a quick turn real quick, but you got to lay down roots at some point. They lost their quarterback. They lost their top receiver to the portal. I'm just curious because this is a program that was winning games under Dino at a high rate, and they did early on, and obviously he got the extension, and then they got blown out of the water, and it hasn't been the same since for them. And they're going to be a middling team. Like, again, they've got enough talent that they could make life miserable for somebody. One of the good teams and maybe pull a crazy upset if someone overlooks them, and I don't think so. But just kind of more of an overarching thought about the idea of a program that was one of the better programs in this conference for a while and seems to be kind of in a weird spot where I feel like a lot of the prep work I've done this offseason has been, hey, this team brought in 15 new transfers. And I'm like, cool, that's great. But I wonder if there's like a diminishing returns thing in the long run over being overly reliant on the transfer portal. Like, obviously, if you can go out like a Notre Dame and get a top flight quarterback, and I mean, USC, theirs was a little different because he just came with Lincoln Riley. And there are some positions that you want to go out and get. But like, to me, it's going to be really hard to be really good on your offensive line and defensive line if you're relying on transfers every single year. And maybe you can pick and choose your spots, but and I just use Michigan State as the jumping off point because like I said, they had a really good first year under Mel Tucker, and that looks like one of the worst contract extensions we've seen in a long time.
It's tough. I mean, the transfer portal, it's a lot. It reminds me of how you build an NFL team. Like, the best NFL teams aren't reliant on free agency. They're reliant on building through the draft. And then when there's a big need that happens to align in free agency, you go get that guy. Like you mentioned, Notre Dame and Sam Hartman. Notre Dame does obviously hit the transfer portal here and there, but they don't build their program on it. They build it on a foundation of recruiting. And then when there's a transfer they really need, like a quarterback position that's open, cool, we went and got Sam Hartman. That's kind of how Alabama does. That's how Michigan, that's how they lost like two pieces on the offensive line. They brought back some talent for consistency, but yeah, they went out and got two new pieces to come fill in. That's how you have to use the transfer portal. If you use the transfer portal like Mel Tucker has, where you're just kind of recycling your team every year, you are going to have years like 2 years ago where you have a flash in the pan and everything clicks and you have a 10-win whatever season, you beat somebody good. Those are going to happen, but they're going to be few and far between. If you can't build your program via recruiting and build a culture and then add on to that through the transfer portal, you're never going to have that sustained success. You're going to have a roller coaster. You're going to have 1 year up here. You're going to have 2 years down here. It's just how it's always going to kind of be because, I mean, as nice as the transfer portal is at times, if you're not getting the top tier people in the transfer portal, those mid-tier guys hitting the transfer portal are leaving because either they didn't work out, they didn't want to be there anymore, or their team didn't really want them to be there anymore, and they kind of saw no reason to be there. They didn't think they were going to have a chance to play. So you're kind of picking over people that have been passed over, and sometimes it's going to work. Sometimes more likely than not, it's not going to. If you're doing this year in and year out and relying on that way to build your team, it's just not sustainable.
I also think it's really hard to build a culture.
Yeah.
And there's so much roster churn every single year. It's like, how do you get people just to buy in to what you're selling when it's like, well, that guy's going to be gone in a year and I don't know what any of these veteran players are doing and so on and so forth. All right, before we get out of here, we each are going to make or give out one bet that we like for this season involving somebody or something in the Big Ten. I told you mine, so I'm curious, what is yours?
Well, Dan, I have two because one of them, my favorite bet is a Wisconsin bet, but I didn't want to be boring and give two Wisconsin bets. My favorite bet is Wisconsin's alt win total, 9 games on DraftKings. I believe it is at it's 9.5, over 9.5 at plus 190. It's one full more win. I get that, but we talked about what their schedule is. Like, I'll read through it again. Buffalo, they'll win that. Washington State, I'm fairly certain they'll win that game. Georgia Southern, win. I think they'll beat Purdue. I think they'll beat Rutgers. Talked about the Iowa game. I think Iowa's a tricky team, but they get them at home. I think they're going to win that game. Illinois, landmine team, but I think they're a much better football team. The Ohio State game is going to be a tough one, but I think there's a really darn good chance that Ohio State's walking into that game, whatever it is, 7-0 with Ohio State on October 28th at home, and they probably again don't win that game, but weird things can happen. That'll probably end up being, the big game of the week and whatever, and Ohio State has to come there. I think there's a really, really good chance we're talking about Wisconsin as a 10-2, 11-1 type team. My non-Wisconsin bet, hold on, I got to scroll down to find it. It's kind of a combo Big Ten Pac-12 bet, but I guess it's a Pac-12 team that will be Big Ten next year, so it's close enough. On DraftKings as well, Penn State to have more wins than USC at plus 110.
Okay.
I like Penn State this year. I do think there's a pretty darn good chance that they lose against Michigan and Ohio State, but also that they just win the rest of their football games, because I do think that seems like something James Franklin would do. I think they're better than just about anybody in that conference not named Michigan, Ohio State, and unfortunately those two teams are in their division. And USC, we'll get to in the Pac-12, but That's a loaded conference this year. Caleb Williams is obviously back, but they're basically replacing all of the skill players around him. We talk about teams that hit the transfer portal hard. USC hit the transfer portal hard. A lot of new pieces coming in. And that defense, I don't really know why Alex Grinch continues to be employed by teams, but not only is it bad, like they do the little things even awful. They don't tackle. We saw against Utah. They're allowing 30 some points a game. And I think it's just going to get to a point where the offense is going to have to do a little bit too much in a league that, again, we'll get to, has gotten really, really deep this year. That Pac-12 is going to be a very, very good conference, and it should be going out with a bang, I think, with how many good teams we have there. So I think it plus money for Penn State to have more wins than regular season wins, I should say, than USC is another one I like.
That's a really good bet. And I think your Wisconsin bet was better than mine. I just took the easy route with a Wisconsin to win the West at plus 130.
I love that at plus money. I know it's...
Yeah, that's at DraftKings, so that's readily available anywhere. You can bet legally on the sport of college football, but we talked about it. I'm beating a dead horse here, I know, but like I just love the decisions that they've made. Luke Fickell is a winning head coach. He built a program at Cincinnati into a team that could contend at the highest level of the sport, as well as develop NFL caliber players. Mm-hmm. He's going to go to a place where it's probably a little bit easier to win, not necessarily at a high level, but just because it's a Power 5 team, you can recruit at a higher level. Phil Longo is a good coordinator. They have a good offensive line, good wide
Tanner
receivers.
Mordecai's a really good quarterback.
Tanner Mordecai can sling it, as the kids would say. They're Wisconsin, so they're going to play defense pretty well over the course of the season. So I really like Wisconsin. I am not sold on Iowa. I understand that they're probably going to end up winning 9 games just because they're going to play great defense and all of that, but they have to go to Penn State. I believe to Penn State.
Yeah, they go to Penn State.
To Wisconsin this year. They're not winning both of those games. And that's going to give them less margin for error, even if they somehow win that Wisconsin game. Like the margin for error gets thin. I know Wisconsin does have to play Ohio State, but to me, Iowa winning at Camp
Randall,
but
that game doesn't have to do anything with the Big Ten West, luckily for Wisconsin.
Like Iowa going to Camp Randall and winning just seems unlikely to me at this point. Who knows what's going to happen over the course of the season, but I'm just not a big Iowa guy. Minnesota's probably a year away. Minnesota's trying to go a little more balanced on offense. Mo Ibrahim is gone. So they're going to try to be, and they really do believe in Callie McManus as being the future of that program. And if you watch some of his film, like he's got a huge arm. I could see potential there. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than just having a big arm, but they're probably a year away. Purdue, I like the high, like I like giving Walters a chance, and I love Hudson Card, and I'd love to see him succeed, but that one feels like that's going to be...
I like the hire, and I think long-term he's going to be there, but this just seems like a tough transition year for them.
Yeah. Illinois, I think they're going to just take a small step back, and I think that Northwestern is a dumpster fire of epic proportions. So Wisconsin, plus 130 at plus money. I love that. And we will do the Big 12 tomorrow, and a fun bit. I didn't send this to you and Phil via the DMs, but that Arch Manning prop that I sent you is now I said at anything plus money, it was whether or not Arch Manning is going to start this year. And if it's the answer was none, 0 games in the regular season was plus money. I said, as long as that's plus money, it's really bad. And it's now minus 140. So
of course,
we will discuss once I hit the button to end the show here, what time we will be back tomorrow to talk about the Big 12 and the Texas Longhorns and the Oklahoma Sooners as they are on their way out the door of the Big 12. Matt and I are out the door for the rest of the day. We will be back tomorrow to talk some Big 12 football. We'll talk ACC, SEC, Pac-12 later on this weekend, folks. It is week 0. We have real life, by God, college football.
We made it. It's college football season.
We made it. It is football season, and we will be back tomorrow with more previews. Until then, have a great night, and we will talk to you guys